Every generation has its poison. Ours is pleasure. We've built a world addicted to the next hit, the next scroll, the next meal, the next validation. We call it freedom, but it's slavery in disguise. The modern man doesn't need chains. He's too busy chasing dopamine to notice he's trapped. Carl Jung warned that what we don't make conscious controls us. And today it's not fear or pain that owns us. It's comfort, the silent killer of discipline, meaning, and depth. The pursuit of pleasure has become our collective religion, and the altar we sacrifice ourselves on glows from every screen. Pleasure was meant to be experienced, not worshipped. It was a visitor, not a master, but we built our lives around it, and now it rules us quietly, rewiring our brains to crave the trivial while rejecting the profound. The result? A society that's overstimulated but underfulfilled. Pleasure everywhere, purpose nowhere. This is the great tragedy of the modern soul. Not that we suffer too much, but that we suffer too little to grow. Because in escaping discomfort, we've escaped ourselves. The truth is simple and brutal. The more you chase pleasure, the less alive you become. 1. Pleasure promises freedom, but breeds slavery. Pleasure begins as a whisper, soft, harmless, seductive. It promises relief. It tells you, you deserve this. You've earned it. This will make you feel alive. And for a moment, it does. But like every illusion, its sweetness fades, and all that remains is hunger, louder, emptier, more demanding than before. Carl Jung would say that the psyche is not destroyed by darkness, but by indulgence. Because darkness reveals truth, indulgence hides it. Pleasure masquerades as freedom. But every time you give in to it, a part of your will weakens. What once felt like choice becomes reflex. What once was enjoyment becomes need. The trap is that pleasure feels like control. You think you're choosing the meal, the drink, the scroll, the person, but it's choosing you. The chemical spike in your brain trains you to obey it again and again. And soon, you're no longer chasing joy. You're escaping withdrawal. This is how freedom becomes slavery. Not through force, but through comfort. You're not shackled by pain, but by the constant craving to avoid it. Modern society has turned this addiction into virtue, selling pleasure as liberation, while quietly eroding the willpower that once built civilizations. We worship choice, but it's a shallow one. The choice to consume endlessly. The choice to distract ourselves from the abyss of silence. The choice to avoid anything that demands endurance. Pleasure gives you the illusion of autonomy while making you easier to control. Governments, corporations, algorithms, they don't need to oppress you. They just need to keep you comfortable. Jung warned that the greatest danger to the modern soul is unconsciousness, the state of living without awareness of what controls you. Pleasure thrives in that blindness, because the moment you become aware of how it manipulates you, it loses power. Awareness breaks the spell, but breaking it is not easy. Pleasure is cunning. It adapts. It disguises itself as self-care, rest, or reward. It tells you you're just relaxing while slowly eroding your discipline, focus, and depth. You stop building. You start consuming. You stop pursuing meaning. You start chasing relief. And here lies the paradox. Pleasure is not the enemy. Attachment is. A disciplined mind can enjoy pleasure without being enslaved by it. But an undisciplined mind mistakes pleasure for peace. It doesn't rest, it escapes. It doesn't enjoy, it indulges. It confuses numbness with satisfaction. You can see the results everywhere. The dull eyes of those scrolling endlessly. The quiet despair behind constant entertainment. The addiction to validation, attention, comfort, anything that spares them from confronting themselves. What begins as desire always ends as dependence, because every unexamined pleasure becomes a god, and the more you worship it, the smaller your soul becomes. Freedom was never about doing whatever you want. It was about mastering what wants you. Jung believed that the conscious man reclaims his power not by rejecting desire, but by understanding it, by integrating it into something higher. To use pleasure as fuel for creation, not as escape from meaning. Pleasure is not evil. But when it owns you, it robs you of everything sacred: discipline, vision, courage, love. It steals your ability to choose. And that's the greatest tragedy. You think you're free because you're doing what you want, but in truth, you're only doing what your addiction commands. That's not freedom. That's slavery in disguise. 2. Comfort is the new cage. Comfort has become the modern god, worshipped in every form, disguised as self-care, success, and balance. It's the silent religion of a world terrified of pain. We build our lives around avoiding discomfort, temperature-controlled homes, algorithmic entertainment, endless convenience. Everything designed not to awaken us, but to soothe us. And so, slowly, comfort becomes a cage, one we decorate with luxuries and justify with excuses. We say we want peace, but what we really want is sedation. Carl Jung warned that the soul cannot evolve without friction. Growth demands opposition, resistance, struggle, tension between what you are and what you could be. Yet modern life has engineered every friction point out of existence. We've become insulated from challenge, from silence, from our own discomfort. The result? A generation that feels everything and learns nothing. A world that talks endlessly about fulfillment but knows nothing of endurance. Comfort feels like peace because it's quiet, but it's the quiet of paralysis, the stillness before decay. When you stop exposing yourself to challenge, the parts of you meant to expand begin to atrophy. Your courage fades, your willpower weakens. Your hunger dies. The mind, like the body, decays in the absence of strain. This is why people who live for comfort rarely feel alive. They aren't suffering, and yet something in them aches. Because life without difficulty has no texture, no intensity, no weight. The absence of pain becomes the absence of meaning. Jung believed that we're not here to escape struggle. We're here to transform through it. Every trial, every discomfort, every heartbreak is an initiation into greater awareness. But most refuse initiation. They would rather stay safe than awaken. You can see it everywhere, in careers chosen for stability, not passion. In relationships maintained out of fear, not love. In minds addicted to scrolling, not thinking. People call it peace. Jung would call it regression, a return to psychological infancy where the world exists only to comfort you. But comfort doesn't care about your soul. It only cares about keeping you still. And stillness without purpose becomes death in slow motion. Jung said that the unconscious the deeper part of us, will create suffering if we don't consciously seek growth. That's why comfort never lasts. The psyche begins to rebel. Anxiety, boredom, and restlessness appear, not as punishment, but as signals. Life knocking on the door, reminding you that ease was never the point. Pain, challenge, and uncertainty are the raw materials of transformation. Without them, there is no self-mastery, no depth, no authenticity. Comfort may protect you from failure, but it also shields you from greatness. The soul was never meant to live in a padded cell. It was meant to wrestle with chaos, to risk itself, to be shaped by experience. Every step outside the comfort zone is a small act of resurrection, a return to aliveness. Jung believed that wholeness requires contact with the full spectrum of existence, light and dark, pain and pleasure, struggle and peace. Comfort cuts you off from that wholeness. It promises security but delivers emptiness. So ask yourself, is your peace real or just the absence of movement? Are you alive or merely comfortable? Because comfort will never set you free. It will keep you still long enough for life to pass you by. The world may celebrate your call, but your soul knows the truth. It wasn't born for safety. It was born for fire. 3. You've mistaken stimulation for life. Carl Jung once warned that when the inner life is empty, man seeks distraction in the outer world. Today, that prophecy defines us. We live in a world that confuses stimulation with aliveness, where motion replaces meaning and noise replaces depth. We've mistaken dopamine for vitality. The endless scroll, the flashing screen, the next notification. Each promises life but delivers only emptiness. You're not experiencing the world anymore. You're consuming it in fragments. Pleasure gives the illusion of fullness while hollowing you out from the inside. You're not alive. You're merely distracted from dying. Modern stimulation is the perfect trap because it feels like engagement. You think you're connected, informed, alive, but you're not. You're anesthetized. You're overdosing on novelty while starving for purpose. Your nervous system stays lit up, but your spirit stays asleep. Jung would say the modern individual suffers not from lack of information, but lack of meaning. The more stimulation you feed the mind, the more it fragments. The more you consume, the less you feel. Because overstimulation doesn't expand consciousness, it shatters it. It spreads your attention so thin that you forget what depth ever felt like. And yet, this is what society celebrates. We call distraction connection. We call consumption living. We call burnout success. The tragedy isn't that people are exhausted. It's that they're exhausted by things that don't matter. Every second of artificial pleasure, the scroll, the click, the like, keeps you just alive enough to avoid reflection, but not alive enough to change. Stimulation becomes a wall between you and yourself, because when you slow down, silence begins to whisper, and in that silence, you might realize how far you've drifted from what truly matters. That's why people keep running. They fear the stillness more than death. In stillness, you're forced to confront the truth that you've traded awe for amusement, depth for dopamine, being for distraction. You don't live anymore, you react. And reaction is not life. It's the automation of existence. Jung said that neurosis is the avoidance of legitimate suffering. Stimulation is the modern form of that avoidance. We run from discomfort by flooding the senses, but the more we numb, the more disconnected we become from the pulse of our own soul. You can't feel wonder and addiction at the same time. One demands awareness, the other destroys it. This is why modern life feels hollow, even when it's full. You're surrounded by sound, but you can't hear yourself think. You're surrounded by beauty, but your eyes have lost the ability to see. Everything that once had depth, conversation, intimacy, art, faith, has been flattened into content. And yet the cure is simple and terrifying. You have to stop consuming long enough to remember what being alive actually feels like, to rediscover what silence sounds like, to feel boredom again, not as punishment, but as purification, because stimulation is the enemy of soul. It keeps you safe from reflection, but reflection is where you meet yourself. Jung believed that the unconscious always seeks wholeness, and when overstimulation blocks that process, the psyche rebels. Depression, anxiety, numbness, they're not signs of failure. They're signs that your soul is suffocating beneath the noise. You think you need more excitement, but what you really need is presence. Because life doesn't happen in the scroll, the screen, or the spike of dopamine. It happens in the silence between them. Until you learn to sit in that silence, you'll keep mistaking stimulation for life and slowly forget what living ever meant. 4. Pleasure destroys desire. Carl Jung warned that anything you over-identify with eventually consumes you. Pleasure is no exception. It starts as color and warmth, the sweetness of being alive, but when chased without restraint, it turns gray, dull, and lifeless. The more you indulge, the less you feel, because pleasure doesn't satisfy, it desensitizes. At first it feels divine, the meal, the drink, the scroll, the rush. It floods you with life, with intensity, with that fleeting sense of this is it. But the moment fades. The body adapts. The mind demands more. The threshold rises, and suddenly what once thrilled you now bores you. Pleasure's curse is that it cannot stand still. It must escalate or disappear. And so you begin to chase the ghost of your first high. The initial hit of novelty, the spark of awe that made you feel whole. But no repetition brings it back. The reward system dulls, the senses flatten, and life itself loses its flavor. You aren't growing anymore. You're overdosing on experience, hoping quantity will replace depth. This is how pleasure destroys desire. Not by taking it away, but by overwhelming it until it dies. Desire needs distance, mystery, anticipation. Pleasure annihilates all three. It gives you everything now, leaving nothing left to long for. What once burned bright becomes mechanical. Routine indulgence mistaken for joy. Jung understood this as a spiritual sickness, the collapse of polarity. Life thrives in tension, between hunger and fulfillment, light and dark, effort and reward. When you remove that tension through constant gratification, the psyche loses vitality. The world no longer feels alive because nothing is earned. The soul begins to suffocate under the weight of excess. Modern culture has normalized this decay. Every pleasure is on demand. Music, sex, validation, entertainment, distraction. You never need to wait, never need to hunger. And yet, with every indulgence, something sacred diminishes. The fire that once drove you to create, to pursue, to transcend, it dims. because when everything is available, nothing is meaningful. Desire is the fuel of evolution. It's what drives creation, ambition, intimacy, art. Without it, we drift into spiritual paralysis. Pleasure kills that fuel by making satisfaction instant and effortless. You no longer strive, you consume. You no longer imagine, you scroll. The more you indulge, the less alive you feel. You start to mistake numbness for calm. The highs blur together into a flat line of comfort. You begin to crave extremes just to feel something, but even that eventually fails. Pleasure leaves you hollow because it was never meant to fill you, only to remind you of life's sweetness. It was a spice, not a meal. Jung believed that when the soul loses contact with meaning, it compensates through excess of work, pleasure, or distraction. But that excess always collapses into despair because no external sensation can replace the depth of inner purpose. Pleasure has its place in celebration, in connection, in beauty. But when you chase it endlessly, it stops being joy and becomes anesthesia. It dulls not only your pain, but your passion. It makes you incapable of awe. True desire isn't about endless consumption. It's about direction. It's about the tension between what is and what could be. It's about longing with purpose. If you want to feel alive again, you must let go of constant gratification. You must reintroduce hunger into your life. Because hunger, not indulgence, is where passion is reborn. The paradox is clear. The more you feed the body, the more the soul starves. The more you chase pleasure, the more it slips away. Because pleasure is not the path to aliveness. It's the slow, silent death of desire. And without desire, there is nothing left worth living for. 5. Pain was never the enemy. It was the teacher. Carl Jung believed that pain is not punishment. It is instruction. It's the soul's most honest language, the call to growth that the ego spends its life trying to ignore. Every wound, every loss, every disappointment is not an obstacle to your becoming. It is your becoming. Pain was never the enemy. It was the forge. But in the modern world, we've forgotten this. We treat suffering as a glitch in the system, something to medicate, escape, or silence. We've turned comfort into a religion and pain into a sin. Yet every civilization, every hero, every truth ever worth remembering was born from discomfort. The universe evolves through tension, and so do you. When you numb pain, you numb meaning. You rob your psyche of the friction it needs to transform. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward wholeness through the integration of both light and shadow. And no shadow is ever integrated without pain, because pain strips away illusions. It reveals what comfort hides. It exposes the false layers of identity that keep you small. Pain humbles the ego. It burns away pride, complacency, and fantasy. It forces you to see yourself without pretense, not as you wish to be, but as you are. That is why it feels unbearable. It dissolves the masks you spent years constructing. But what comes after that death is not destruction, it's rebirth. Without pain, you stay fragile. You mistake sensitivity for depth, comfort for peace, pleasure fulfillment. But the soul only grows through the weight of its own resistance. The athlete builds strength by tearing muscle. The artist finds truth by confronting chaos. The awakened human becomes whole by walking through their own fire. We've built a society allergic to that fire. We chase pleasure, sedate discomfort, and wonder why we feel weak. We've forgotten that the very thing we're running from, heartbreak, failure, grief, uncertainty, is what refines us. Pain is not chaos. It's the universe reshaping you into something capable of carrying greater meaning. Jung said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And the only way to make darkness conscious is to enter it, to feel it fully, to listen to what it's teaching. Pain is the doorway to consciousness because it demands presence. You can't be numb and awake at the same time. When you finally stop escaping, pain becomes a guide. It tells you where you're still attached, where you're still afraid, where you still refuse to grow. Every ache in the heart is a message. There is more to you than this. The moment you stop fighting pain and start listening to it, something shifts. Suffering turns into strength. Fear becomes fuel. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" And that single question changes everything. Because pain is the only experience honest enough to show you what truly matters. It is not the end of your peace. It's the beginning of your power. The people who terrify the world are not those who avoid pain, but those who have walked through it and come back with wisdom. They no longer chase pleasure because they've tasted something deeper, purpose. So stop running from pain. Let it strip you. Let it burn you. Let it teach you what nothing else can. Because the truth Jung knew, the truth few are brave enough to face, is that pain was never the curse. It was always the teacher. And every scar it leaves is simply the signature of your evolution. Carl Jung believed that life's purpose was not comfort, not pleasure, not the avoidance of pain, but transformation. Every comfort you protect, every pleasure you chase, every pain you escape, keeps you from becoming what you were meant to be. The modern world has convinced us that peace means ease, but real peace, the kind that lasts, comes only after the storm. It is the calm that follows confrontation, not the calm that avoids it. Jung knew that meaning is forged in struggle, and that the human soul, when denied its suffering, begins to decay in silence. The truth is brutal, but sacred. Pleasure softens you. Pain strengthens you. Pleasure distracts you. Pain awakens you. Pleasure gives you moments. Pain gives you transformation. Every wound, every failure, every heartbreak is not life punishing you. It's life shaping you into someone capable of carrying the weight of truth. You were never meant to live anesthetized. You were meant to burn, to rise from the ashes of your own avoidance and stand in the fullness of your becoming. So stop asking how to feel good. Ask how to become whole. Because the soul doesn't crave comfort. It craves completion. And that completion only comes to those brave enough to suffer consciously, to those who let the fire refine them until nothing false remains.